Good morning. Good morning. Welcome, everybody, to the Saturday Morning Mastermind. I'm your host today, Samantha Studebaker-Carl, broadcasting to you from Claremont, Indiana this time. And for those of you who are new to watching our show, each week we get together and we talk about different books, personal development books. And today we're talking about The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman, and we've been studying the singles version, but of course if you have one of the other versions, they all discuss kind of the same things. But we're on chapter 13, which discusses kids and single parents. And so anyway, before we get started, I want to give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then we can jump into our topic this week. And go ahead and jump out, guys.
I'm Bill Maybauer up in Olympia, Washington in the far northwest.
I am Catherine Clement in Boulder, Colorado.
Dan Sisek in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Awesome, guys. And I just want to thank you both for the last couple of weeks. I haven't been on because of moving and helping with my grandbabies. And so I just appreciate you guys so much for just rolling on without me. I just love that. It's awesome that we can do that. Okay, so chapter 13, which is single parents and kids and the 5 love languages. And one of the things in here it kind of said is, I kind of like this little quote here. It says, each child has a primary love language, the language that speaks most deeply to his soul and meets his emotional need to feel loved. If parents fail to discover and speak the child's primary love language, then he may feel unloved even though the parent is speaking other languages. And thanks, Dan. I find it really interesting. I see a lot of people struggling with their kids, and I had a lot of people tell me that they thought that I had a really great relationship with my kids, and I've always felt that way too. And but I never really thought about why. And then I've also had people talk about their kids and they're struggling through the teenage years and that sort of thing, and that it's just been so hard and I don't feel like I ever really struggled through that. And I didn't really know why. But now, after reading this chapter, I realized that, maybe it was because I was just good. I just happened to be good at speaking my kids' love language. And if I hadn't been, we may have had a whole lot more struggles through that time. So, what do you guys think? Who else? I know, Catherine, you've got kids. Bill, you've got kids. Yeah, you were just talking about your daughter. What's been your experience? You're muted.
I've had mixed combined families, and so some of them weren't. I didn't have kids when I just have one that I was the father of, and the rest were either adopted or brought in by marriage and stuff. And so I didn't get the experience other than Matt, who's in the military now, dealing with him when he was a real little child. And I think I missed the boat on finding what his love language was. He was a little rebellious in high school, and so ended up ultimately going into the Army, and he's flowered up, bloomed, I guess is a better term, done very well there. And I've been thinking when I was reading this chapter last night, what was his love language? And I'm still not totally sure what it was, but I think I didn't quite hit it. So, and I'm not sure. I'm just still working on that one. But yeah, you need to start thinking about it. I wish I would have thought about it a lot more. Now I'm looking at grandkids and trying to figure out where they're at and try to help the parents at least take a look at what since they see them all the time. We're up in Washington and they're down in Texas, so they're a long ways away, so we don't get to see them very often on what their love language is. So would be a good conversation to have with the kids, find out what grandkids' love languages are. So that's that's been my goods and the bads on that one. So it takes some work to try to figure that out and observing and listening. That's about it.
Catherine, how about you? What's been your experience?
I'm very close to my kids, but I didn't know anything about the love languages, so I missed out on theirs, obviously, because mine is acts of service, and that's how I show people love. And so that's what I did. I worked my ass off and tried to keep a roof over their head. And it's amazing to me, in reading this chapter. Of course, I knew this before I read this chapter, but in reading the chapter, how a parent can be doing their very, very best, to show their child that they love them, and yet the child cannot receive it at all. And it says in there somewhere something about it doesn't matter. Of course, a parent loves their child, and it doesn't matter how much they love them. It's how much love the child is receiving. It doesn't matter how much love you try to show your child. It's how much is your child receiving, and a lot of that's based on if you're speaking the right love language. So, there's multiple examples in this chapter about where a parent, thought that they were doing everything that they should be doing, and yet the child still felt unloved. And so I think that's why this book is so important, and especially, well, I would say for any parents, but especially for single parents, because there's just even more of a time crunch there. You're often having to work multiple jobs. And so I know personally, I lost a lot of time with my kids, working hard, trying to keep a roof over their head. And if I had known these love languages, it would have helped close that gap a little bit. It would, and I think it's important for, any parents, but especially single parents, to read this book, because if you do have limited time, if you can just cut to the chase, I mean, if they're gifts, then if you can cut to the chase and buy them a gift, and, not spend your time doing 12 hours of something else that they don't receive, So, I think it's really powerful to help that time crunch and make it a little bit easier, because you might be doing a whole bunch of other stuff. One of the examples was a father who, I guess the child, there were visitation, and so the child would come probably spend the weekend with the dad, and the dad, and this is a really typical scenario, I think. The dad, took them to a football game and, did all these things with them. The dad, probably quality time, I'm guessing. And yet the child didn't feel loved, and told the counselor or whoever that, well, yeah, but he never asks me how I feel or what I think about things. And so I don't know. It's love is a weird thing. How we all, receive it differently. And I'm trying to figure out all my grandchildren's love languages too. But still, yet my children's, I mean, I've got them figured out now, but I wish I had known when they were growing up, because we would be even closer. We're close, but we would be even closer.
Now, I'll go from a child's perspective, because I am not a single parent or a parent. I am kind of pseudo in some ways to my roommate, as I've explained that situation from in the past, and with my nieces and nephews. But for me, I'll be honest, and I think I've kind of alluded to this before in some of the other, things we talked. In my family, I don't think anybody really gets my love language. The only person that really ever got it was my grandmother, who is no longer alive. She's been dead for 13 years. So that part of my life has that big void of having somebody that knows how to, as the author puts it in the book, feel my love tank, that would fill me up and give me what I needed so I could go out there and face the world and deal with other family members and stuff like that. The only person that's coming close is my aunt, but even then she has her family and her stuff, and so she can't, so in that sense, this book has really helped me realize those things, but it's also magnified it in a lot of ways too. That I'm like, okay, well, I know kind of what my languages are, and yet nobody in my family speaks this to me. Yeah, that kind of, you know, and I do get, what the, like in the book where the one kid was saying, you don't feel quite as, you love, but you don't feel it, and there's a difference between knowing and feeling it. It has two very distinct feelings, and yes, I don't question that my family loves me one bit, but the feeling, and it was interesting because reading this book, and then last night I watched a movie called Inside Out from Pixar, which deals about a lot of, you know, deals with the mind of a child and how they, and it was showing a lot of things that kind of, I think, kind of were taken from this book without knowing about this book, and talking about things about how family and how you do and how you react and how you respond and how you do stuff, because all her life the little girl felt that she was really loved and her family was there and they had that special bond and connection. But then when she moved and things started happening and other things started, her whole world changed, that's when she changed, and her perception of what her family and stuff may change too. And I think outside influences also have another big impact on how we look at our relationships too. So I think that's another part to look at, that I'm realizing too, that there's a whole lot even more than just even the love languages. It's, everything else that our environment throws at us too.
Yeah, I think that's important to realize, Dan. Is yeah, and I think that maybe going back and reading some of what the previous chapters were talking about, how like I remember he was talking about this one young man who said that he never really felt love from his parents, and he gave him some exercises on, here, go do these things, and see what happens. And then he started to feel more love from his parents because he was giving them what they needed. And so I don't know, maybe you can do some of that with your other family members and see what happens. But yeah, I've been trying to really listen and watch my kids, because of course my daughter now, she is all the way in South Carolina, and of course my my primary love language, I feel like, has always been, quality time. And so that's really difficult for us if she's way down there, and I'm not a big person for talking on the phone. So it's been interesting trying to find the right balance to make sure that I'm giving her what she needs so that we can stay close, being that far away. And then my son he's just really quiet. And so he doesn't have a whole lot to say most of the time. I know he's got all kinds of stuff going on in his brain because, he and I are real similar in that way. He's more introspective. And so I've been trying to pay more attention to him and try and figure out more of what his love language is, because I'm just not entirely sure. So I feel like I just really need to discover that. And then I can, like Catherine said, just become even closer with my kids. I like how it has these little steps for figuring out your kids' love language, because it says in here, here's some principles that they've talked about in previous chapters about how to figure it out. And it gives 3 things. It says, number 1, observe how your child expresses love to you. If your daughter is always looking for a hug, this may be an indication that her primary love language is physical touch. If your son is always giving praise or thanks, his love language may be words of affirmation. Number 2, listen to your child's requests. what the child requests most often is a clue to his or her primary love language. These children are asking for quality time, and it is probably their primary love language. Listen to complaints, like, why didn't you bring me a present? Maybe your son's way of telling you that his love language is gifts. And or we don't go to the beach anymore since daddy left. Maybe an indication that child's primary love language is quality time. So I think that that's really important to really pay attention to your kids to try and figure out what it is. So one thing I remember in this chapter, I actually listened to this a couple days ago, and it was talking about parents that are struggling with their kids in terms of discipline, where the child is acting out, and it spoke to wrapping the discipline in love. And I thought that was a really powerful idea. And I remember I had studied some books about parenting or communication or something like that when I was a little bit younger. My kids were teenagers, and I remember reading something similar to that, where it was like, always, maybe it was even How to Win Friends and Influence People may have had something to say on that aspect of it, is that when you have something that you need to communicate that is kind of a criticism, if you will, is to start by giving a praise first, and then share the criticism, and then say a praise afterwards, and that can come around and make it easier. And of course, in here it talks about, starting by saying something loving, and then share the thing that they've done that's not right, and then say something again loving afterwards. And I don't remember where I learned that principle. I don't know. It may not have been How to Win Friends and Influence People. It was something else. But I remember learning that, and I think that made a big difference in how I communicated with my kids, in terms of, when something wasn't going the way I was expecting, it was easier to communicate, and they heard it more when, like you say, you start with a praise. Actually, I think it was a book on employer-employee relationships, because it worked the same way. I remember when I was doing employee evaluations for my folks that were working for me, is that I was doing the same thing. I was sharing the things that they were doing really well, and then I was saying, okay, but you can be working on this and this, and then this is what else you've been doing well. And that it always seemed to come across a lot better, and was much more effective to get them to work with you versus against you. And I think it's the same thing with kids. It's like, I think it gave an example of a child throwing a ball in the house and breaking something, and then the parent had said, you're so responsible, and you do this and that, and you're so great at this, and every now and then something happens, I know, and you forget, and then this is what happens, the thing gets broken, and but I know that you are much better than that, and you're pretty awesome at all these other things, so let's just let's make sure we're not doing this other thing, kind of a thing. So it was I don't know, I think that's interesting. What do you guys think?
Yeah, when you were talking, I was just thinking, I work in a small office. There's only about 8 of us in the office, so you get to know the people a little bit better. And I know there is a book for love languages in the office, and I was just starting to think about that, and how to react, not in a loving way, of course, but it's a cooperative way, and how I should be able to address some of their love languages in just communication with them. Of course, I got to watch the physical touch side, but if that's one of theirs, but anyhow, just a little humor there. But you need to, if you could stroke some of their love languages, it might make the office go a little bit smoother in your interaction with them on a professional basis, of course. But just a thought as we were talking, I just said, yeah, in a big office where you got hundreds of people, that would be hard, but we just have 8, and so it'd be easy to do. And because I know I struggle with one or two people in there that it sure could go easier. But anyhow, I'm thinking on that line, and I'm just, as we're going through this, I'm trying to bring back thoughts about how I interacted with my kids and how that would work. So just bringing up lots of thoughts.
For me, I think, what you were talking about, my grandmother did a little bit of like that. She would, you know, get mad or frustrated when I did something wrong. I would get in trouble, but then she would go back and kind of explain why she got mad. And I tend to do that, now with people. I tend to, go get mad and irritated, but then I go back and try to help them explain, because I don't want them to think that they're not in my, well, with my family, not loved. Like if I get mad at family members or my friends and stuff, because I love my friends and stuff, you know I want them to know that it doesn't change the relationship. It's just right now you're not the most you know likable person, and then you did something that you know pissed me off, or hurt me or something like that, but it's not going to change. And then, so I want them to feel that way, because growing up with my real parents, and going through the abuse, that's all I really felt, was that I never did anything right, or that I couldn't do anything right, and that you know I don't really have any. I may have one or two fond memories from when I was a child, but most of them are just, there's really nothing there that I connect with, or that I hold on to, or that, I just remember all the negative and all the very, and I think that's why I try and go overboard this side of it, to make sure that, when something happens, that, oh, I didn't mean it, or, oh, I'm sorry, that type of thing, and so I tend to go like that with other people. It's like, no, it's okay. It's not, I'm mad, but I don't want you to think I hate you either, that type of thing. So I've seen, how it helped, plays out for me in that sense too.
I have kind of mixed feelings about it. I mean, I think it's great that we're learning how to communicate better as a species, and that we are paying attention to the fact that people give and receive differently, and people actually have feelings. And then there's this other old school part of me that just wants to say, get the hell over it. Like, if parents are out there working their ass off to keep a roof over your head and they're not beating the shit out of you, you got a good life. You know what I mean? I hate to play the devil's advocate here, but it's, I think it's sort of like Montessori school. It's a great concept. And yet I've talked to kids that went to Montessori school that then when they get out into the quote real world, it's a harsh reality. Like they cannot freaking deal with it because they've been coddled all of their education. And I think there's got to be a happy medium here somewhere. There's got to be, yeah, you want to do the best you can, and at the same time you can't. I mean, that kid at some point is going to have to go deal with people who haven't read this book. And if they're expecting everybody to give them their love language all the time, they're in for a harsh reality, guys.
I think that's a good point, Catherine. And, but at the same time, I think that, for those of us who are reading these books, or anybody who wants to improve their relationships, it's interesting, because if you are somebody who reads a book, then you go out there in the world and you can improve your relationships faster and easier than anyone else, because they haven't read any of these kinds of books, and but yeah, I agree what if we taught our kids at a younger age some of these principles? I think that could make a big difference there, because then they wouldn't be so surprised when people act crazy out there in the world, I mean, and it's like, I don't know, I watch some of the folks at my work, and they just are struggling so much in their relationships, and just little things between each other at the coworker to coworker, and I'm like, my God, you're so focused on this one thing. If you just let it go, or focus on your own shit, rather than worrying about what everybody else is doing, you'd have a happier situation all the way around, and it's just little stuff like that. I'm like, did I just I learned that from a book. Is that a natural thing that came to me? I don't know. But, I have to say I probably have learned it in some way, reading something somewhere, because I read a lot. And not as much as some people do that I've studied. But, I still, over the years, I've read a lot of things. And when I see people just making themselves miserable over the silliest stuff, I'm like, my God. You don't have to do that, Um, so yeah, and like you said, Catherine, just get over it, or just get on with your life. Quit focusing on worrying so much about everything. So I don't know. This is kind of a short little chapter. I didn't even realize it until I just kind of flipped back through the pages. There's only like 4 pages on this chapter. We have anything else we want to add on the single parent or parent versus
Well, I was just looking a little bit in the chapter, and this part about meet your own need for love. And I guess I didn't get too deep in that when I first saw it, because um, it's like it's talking about. Let me get back to that. Well, he's talked about primarily about meeting the child's need for love. He says he's keenly aware that single parent is also a creature of need, and he mentions the need for single parents to address their own needs for love, and talks about what children are working through. But it also talks about like the mother who has been abandoned by a husband may have feelings of rejection, anger, or the mother who forced a physically abusive spouse to uh, leave and now struggles. You know, there are a lot of times where single parents put a lot of guilt onto themselves because of decisions that they had to make that impact them, but also impact their kids, that may be bringing about some of the stuff that the kids are going through. And so I think sometimes, that can be a added thing that's put on top of both, because you have the parent feeling really super guilty, then you have the child who acts out, who does stuff, and then they feel guilty because they did something that really hurt their parent, whether it be a mother or father, because I'm sure it goes both ways, because there are single you know parents out there that are fathers, my roommate, you know and stuff like that. So in that sense, I think sometimes, I've seen it with my mom here. Once she got divorced from her first husband, I think there was a lot of stuff that she went through, and it did impact us some too. And so, I think we did things sometimes trying to get attention or this and that too. And I think that just adds a whole nother layer on top of things that, you know, people don't realize that is a whole added layer on top of all the feelings of, your initial love tank isn't full, and then you add layers of other things, and it's like sometimes it's hard to get through all that to, get down to the core thing, because sometimes people get so hurt and so closed off, they don't allow anything really to get in and get close, or to help change that. And so I think that's another area that needs to be addressed. I think we have a lot of that out there in our society too.
Yeah, I just jumped over to that section you were talking about, and And I love how in there it says the best gift you can give your child is your own personal, emotional, physical, spiritual, and intellectual health, your own personal development. And I think Jim Rohn had a quote that was something to the effect of, I'll work on me for you if you work on you for me. And, basically it was stating I'm going to take responsibility for my own everything so that I can be a better person, and then that will naturally affect you in a positive way. And I think that's super important, because if you're taking responsibility for everything in your own life and working on your own emotional roller coasters that you go through and not pushing all of that stuff out onto someone else as if it's their problem and they're the ones that need to fix it, then you obviously are going to have much more success working on yourself than by trying to get other people to conform to how you want them to be, because if you work on yourself, then all of a sudden those things that you thought you were upset about with that other person, you're not anymore. At least that's been my experience. So I think that's pretty interesting. But it goes on to say, it says, as painful as it may seem to admit, the truth is you may have been a single parent for many years. During this time, long or short, you will want to give your children an example of integrity and responsibility that can be a model for them in their journey to adulthood. And that's another thing, is just being an example for your kids, that, because if you're all emotionally struggling yourself and you're lashing out at your children when they're doing little things that annoy you, then that's just an example of how they're just gonna carry that forward and perpetuate that same thing, and probably not gonna feel loved if all you're doing is constantly criticizing because they're not doing what you want them to do or whatever. And whereas if you can focus on loving them and loving yourself and filling up your own love tank, then you're going to be naturally more loving too. And I don't know, that's my thought on it anyway.
Well, I'll jump back out because I think I can, looking back now at, because I've come to a lot of terms with my real mom and stepdad, um, and the things I've gone through. But yet I know that, like my real mother, she was 15 and a half when she got married, 16 when she had me, so she was very young. She was still, in essence, a kid in a lot of ways. And so she had a lot to deal with as a kid. Then, after me and my sister were born, I had two brothers that were born. One was stillborn, and one was died of crib death. I'm sure that had a very psychological effect on her, on top of everything else, on top of, her own mental problems she was going through that played out through what I experienced. So in that, I think looking at it and looking back, I see the importance of needing to love yourself and give yourself permission to love yourself, and doing the things you need to do first to get yourself there, so that way you can be there for your family, for your kids, and a lot of people, no matter how good intention other family members may be, or in my mom's real mother's case, her parents might have been, because I think they had some very, as Catherine would say, very old-fashioned thoughts about, well, you got pregnant, you get married, they kind of, had that strength in that, uh the word I'm trying to think is, power, or not necessarily power, but that ability that, because some, nowadays they might look at you and say, I'm gonna, kids try to go off and have an abortion or this and that without their parents knowing, or this or that, or they, and so in that she might have had some resentment there too with her own real parents, my grandparents. So, I'm, you know going back and looking at the cycles and things like that, because I know how it's really affected me, and it's affected me in relationships that I've had with other people I've wanted to establish relationships and build lives with, and things got in the way, and it's because of my own, and I know it's partly because of my own insecurities. So therefore, it's you know going back to that, loving myself, but trusting others and opening and giving them what they need by understanding their love languages. So then that way I get back. So it's interesting to see how this book is playing out, even for me, and looking back at, my perceptions of things and how it's kind of changed my thought process a little bit, and how I look at some of those aspects of what, she's probably lived with all her life, especially having lost me at, when I was as a kid, you know, because of the abuse and family members coming in and finally, taking over custody and doing the things that she should have been, or her and my stepdad. So it's interesting how this kind of helps me understand those things a little better too.
Yeah, I think that all the books that we study can help us kind of look back and look into our current relationships to see those different aspects of things that we can work on to make things better in the future and make our own selves better. Um, Anybody else have any final thoughts on this chapter before we close out for today? Because I'm feeling like we're running out of topics or not topics, but just running out of conversation on this particular topic. It's kind of short.
We're hitting that railroad crossing, like come to a cliff, and we're gonna kind of.
I know, trying to push it to the hour, but I don't think we're going to make it this time. So that's okay.
And that's fine. I've got things to do with my wife before she heads out. But yes, it also gives me thoughts. And as you were talking about, how my life was, and how my parents treated me, and where not that I'm going to blame them, because it's already done. I've just got to take it and understand it, and then what can I do about it, and how can I improve my life? Because they're gone. They passed away quite a few years ago, and so I just need to understand it, not to blame anybody. You can't blame them for what they did, because they were doing, and like we do, we try to do our best, and sometimes we miss the boat. So you just got to understand it and move on. But it's a good times to reflect and help me understand why I am who I am, and what I need to, possibly what I can do to move on. That's about it. That's my parting shot for the day. And listen. I've been hearing that all the time. Listen, and listen actively.
Yeah, I think that's the key is, learning not to pass judgment or blame or anything, because everybody always does the best they can with what they've got to work with. And you just can't, you do, it's kind of like what they tell you on the airplanes, put your oxygen mask on first. You do need to fill up your own love tank. If you don't have any love in your love tank, you can't express it to other people, or you can, but I mean, it'll be fake, So I think by reading books like this and understanding, like for me, I understood when I did finally go to live with my mom and she kept trying to buy me stuff, at the time, my 9-year-old self just thought, well, she's just trying to buy me off because she didn't raise me for the first 9 years, and I really resented her. But now, reading this book and understanding her primary love language is gifts, I mean, she was doing her best to show me. So for me to be able to look back and understand that automatically fills my love tank. That automatically, it just erases any resentment that I had about that whole situation. And it fills my love tank because I can see now she was doing her best to show me that she loved me, you know. So I think a lot of wounds can be healed and a lot of things can be forgiven once you understand that if everybody can just understand that, you know, people express and receive love differently. And whether they understand all the intricacies to that or not, if they can just get that point across that not everybody gives and receives the same way, and not to expect people to, you know, necessarily be there to please you on every level, understanding you completely, you know, um, like we're all so complicated and nobody really knows what other people are going through because so many of us just don't really share. You know, your parents, at least in my day, parents didn't, there was a lot that wasn't shared, you know. I mean, they just didn't talk about stuff maybe like they do now, or maybe some families still don't, I don't know, but there were just ways that things happened, you know, and if you were in trouble, you were in trouble. You didn't get like kudos, you're a great kid, this and that. No, you just got your ass whipped and that was it. It was done, you know. So things have changed a little bit, and it's good, you know, it's a good change. It's very important for your children to know that, you know, it's the behavior that you disapprove of and not them. You know, that they're not a bad person just because they did a bad behavior or whatever. I mean, everybody does things that are, you know, less than acceptable at times. And, you know, if you can just get it through to them that it's the behavior that's off and not them, I think that goes a long way, however you choose to do that. So I know that we are going to be choosing a new book. We only have like one chapter left in this one. So be looking out, and probably Samantha's going to talk to this too. Be looking out in our Facebook group. We're going to put a list of books up there. Go there, Mindset Mastery Collective, and help us vote on the next book. We usually take a couple weeks off in between books to let everybody order it, but we do need to make a decision on what we're going to read next. So please bring your suggestions to our Facebook group. And thanks, everybody. Hope everybody had a happy Halloween, and glad you're back, Samantha. Glad you're loving your new home, and I look forward to finishing up this book next week, probably.
Yeah, I'll jump out, and I was going to say, I agree with you on the part where you're saying that it's good that we've had a lot of change, a lot of openness, and people starting to talk more about things. But I also think in some instances, going back to what you were referring to, I think sometimes we may have swung the pendulum a little too far to, you know, because we become so everything, people just jump on everything and everything, and it's almost like, you know, can we kind of come back to the, the closer to the middle, like, you know, because like you said, life is, you know, does not, as I said in the chat, you know, it doesn't really revolve around us, you know, it revolves around everything going on that we're all a part of. But, you know, we're not going to have everything be exactly the way we want it pictured in our heads. And we, you know, and that's part of dealing with life and learning about life and learning to finagle life, you know. But books like this, you know, are what we use to help us navigate our best journey through life. And so that way we can uh, fulfill our what we're supposed to be fulfilling, and also helping build those up that we care about and that are important to us and that are part of our lives, um, building them up to help them be the best people that they're supposed to be, and so that way it continues on. And I think that's part of, you know, the growing and learning and doing stuff like what we do with the books that we read and go over and cover. You know, I know they've helped me a lot, you know, in a lot of ways, and opened me and expanded, how I look at things. So with that, I think, but I still think we need to kind of pull things back from the pendulum swinging so far too.
I'm muted. Okay. Awesome, guys. It's been a great chat today, and I appreciate hearing everything that you've had to say. This has been an awesome discussion. So with that, guys, let's wrap it up and have a great, awesome, amazing weekend. And before I say goodbye, remember to jump over to mindsetmasterycollective.com. That'll take you right to our Facebook group. I'm going to create a post in there where you can add your book suggestions. And we'll give a week for everybody to add suggestions. And after that, I'll create a poll and we can vote on the one that we want to study next. So with that, have a great, awesome, amazing weekend. And we'll see you next week on the Saturday Morning Mastermind. Bye for now.